My name is Mark. I think most of you already know me. This is an environment that I've been creating around this idea of impact culture ever since the publication of my previous book on impact culture. And a big part of the cultures that we are in are around the ethics of how and why we do what we do when it comes to engagement and impact. And there are big questions around this that very few of us have answers to.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm just going to briefly introduce myself and then give you an overview of the research that we've done on this topic of ethics for engagement and impact. So I'm a social scientist and I'm representing the Institute for Methods Innovation today. That's a nonprofit organization based in Ireland and the US. And we do a lot of work supporting research organizations, policy organizations, and others to scope their impact and also to conduct evaluations and set up evaluation frameworks, theory of change projects, that kind of thing. So to set the scene for kind of how we've approached this topic, we framed our analysis around both trying to maximize benefits, so maximize impact, and minimize harms as the kind of key focus within this ethical engagement approach. And we started from the idea that there are some key limitations in terms of there being a lot of expectations about research impact, growing expectations about research impact, but at the same time, we don't have clear guidance, professional training on the ethics of engagement and impact. This is something that's still kind of left in a gray area in a lot of institutions. And it's not gotten the same attention, obviously, that research ethics has. And there are distinctive issues and challenges that come up when we try to look at ethics in the context of engagement and impact. So the situation, the challenge is that there are inconsistent ethical standards in different organizations, and there's a lack of structures and procedures in place, so people are left uncertain about how they should proceed. And there also is a need for better guidance about gathering evidence of research impact and what the ethical issues and challenges and practical guidance should be in the context of evidence gathering. This is something that's come up in the context of the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, for example, where there have been some concerns about the ethics of gathering evidence for the ref. So this context means that there's a need for better guidance, better information, and clear synthesis about how exactly people should proceed, both institutions and individual researchers. So what we need is some kind of practical ways forward so that people can gain a more ethical practice in their work. So we have this forthcoming paper on responsible research impact, ethics for making a difference, that, as Mark said, was co-authored by many authors from around the world and will be submitted later this month, at which point we'd be happy to share with everybody the full paper. So our objectives in this work, we're aiming to identify the main aspects of research, impact, and engagement ethics that needed to be addressed. We wanted to look at existing guidelines. There's a lot of guidelines out there that are relevant to ethical research impact and engagement, but they're scattered across a wide range of fields, of specific topics. Particular areas like biomedicine may have some guidelines that have not reached the broader broader research world. So we wanted to provide a synthesis that brings all this together in a way that makes it more useful. So we did this with a literature review that was done through a collaborative process with a variety of academic and non-academic participants. We used this process to identify key issues to be addressed, and then there was an open invitation for co-authoring the work that was done to produce the final paper that we'll be able to share later in the month. So the scope that we were working with was around looking at the practice of developing ethical impact, so how to be ethical when doing engagement and impact, and also how to avoid unethical research impacts as a critical focus, noting that these are not always the same thing. There's a kind of gray area in between them. So some of the limitations, this was not a full-scale systematic review, and we relied on our co-authorship and open model to identify relevant sources, so that can result in gaps. Okay, so findings. So this is a high-level overview. It's quite a extensive analysis that we're presenting in the full paper. So to kind of summarize some of the major categories, one of them was ethics of care. So this is the responsibility that we have within the context of research impact and engagement to ensure that the way we're going about things is not resulting in harmful outcomes at a variety of levels. So this is something that has a considerable level of overlap with responsibilities in research ethics, but it's a kind of different range of activities and circumstances that come up in the context of research impact. There's also the issue of embedding good ethical practices from the inception of a project, designing for inclusion, and ensuring that the strategy for impact is one that takes into account people's needs and experiences in an inclusive way. So this connects to stakeholder analysis, identifying who relevant parties are, especially in a way that acknowledges who may be affected, not only who is interested or influential. And communication and engagement processes are also affected. Here we think about ensuring alignment, appropriateness of engagement processes for the context, so not kind of foisting an approach onto an inappropriate context just because that's what people are used to doing. There's an ethical imperative to maximize inclusion, particularly for those who might be systematically excluded, and need to maintain involvement for all relevant parties in a way that's respectful. So in the context of evaluating and evidencing research impact, the review highlighted transparency and accountability as crucial factors, the importance of participant involvement and feedback, and the importance of avoiding negative impacts from the process of conducting the evaluation. So what we end up with here is a model where we have to prioritize avoiding harms and maximizing benefits as the kind of crucial focus. That leads us to both principles and practices for responsible research impact work. For institutions, we recommended integrating ethical considerations into their work on research culture and kind of maximizing the inclusion and ethical nature of their impact culture. Also fostering approaches to ethical and responsible research impact that are tailored to specific academic fields and disciplines, because these are not the same challenges and circumstances across all fields. And in the context of low-risk scenarios, we raise the idea of following a duty-based ethics approach where the researcher is supported to behave in an ethical manner. So there's a focus on capacity building rather than a kind of antagonistic us-them kind of relationship as sometimes emerges within research ethics committees, where the kind of assumption is a negative assumption and you have to kind of persuade people that you're going to behave ethically. So we recommended a process of triage where we separate the low and the high risk activities. And then for the low risk ethics and engagement activities, there's a focus on capacity building and clarifying good practices. Whereas the high risk activities, that's where we put that kind of the extra focus and attention and the more intensive bureaucratic processes in place. This is important so that we don't kind of quash important engagement work from even happening because of a high bureaucratic burden. So we want to make sure that we're enabling through the ethical process, because otherwise the process of imposing ethical requirements could actually have unethical outcomes. So in our final section of the paper, we go through key principles and summarize a whole range of guidance on these topics. So practical guidance. I'll just show one example of the specific guidance at the end. So the principles are build capability and capacity among those who may be affected by research impact activities so that they can engage as equals, engage ethically with all relevant parties, meaning taking a broad approach to involvement, manage risk and reduce potential for harm, seek to ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion in engagement and impact, and maintain accountability when you're evaluating engagement and impact. So as a one practical example, so each of these have a whole range of practical guidance sitting under them for the principles. This is just one. It's kind of called the Trust Code, a global code of conduct for equitable research partnership. And it addresses the issue of ethics dumping, the idea that when there's kind of unethical research practices that are being done, that those get kind of exported to lower income settings where people are less able to push back on them. So there's a whole set of practical advice, guidelines that are provided to ensure that the local work is done in a way that is appropriate and equitable. So that includes conducting impact work that is locally relevant, ensuring that local communities can be involved, including in the impact evaluation, so that they are helping to define what counts as success, that they're involved in the dissemination process and they're able to understand what's going on clearly and what the outcomes are, and crucially that there's benefit sharing, so that there are clear efforts to make sure that people with less resources are benefiting from the work that's being done.